Well, sovereign default is a very big deal, and it may be avoided perhaps via a restructuring where creditors will have to take what is known in the market as a haircut. But either way it goes, it's big money we're talking about. The IMF now says the financing gap, i.e. the immediate need, is $15 billion. And that's sort of an estimate of what the EU, because it'll be the taxpayers in the end that will have to come up with this money to bail out Ukraine. So if there is a default, it means we won't get our credits back. If there is a restructure, we will sort of have a settlement that pushes it into the future. But either way, it's a lot of money, and you can imagine what that will do to the government in Greece that feels it should get some money, and to generally the countries, the EU member countries in the south of Europe that don't really feel a big need to help Ukraine. So it's not only a financial issue, though the money is big, it's going to be a very big political problem for the EU as well, either way. Well, one might think so, but Putin is trying to play both sides here. He wants to push Ukraine as close as possible to the edge, though I do not think he would like to see a default, because that means Ukraine owes money to Russia as well. And the contracts they have now for prepayments for gas deliveries will then go down the drain as well. So my guess is that Putin is trying to push Ukraine as close to the edge as possible, hoping that the EU taxpayers will then step in and provide money that will then go into the Russian coffers. That seems to be his game. Obviously, games don't always end the way you plan, but I think that it's going to go pretty much the way Putin wants. I mean, Mr. Putin is playing a winning game here in two senses. One is that his ambition never was to occupy Ukraine militarily. His ambition was to demonstrate to the Ukrainians and to the world that Ukraine is not a workable state, that it needs to have a deal with Russia if it's going to survive. And that point is now being proven. The other game he's been playing is to sort of play divide and conquer within the European Union. And that game is winning as well, with propaganda television being set up in German language and with fissures opening up between various EU member states. The Kremlin is going to play very hard into those fissures, making sure that the European Union also ends up in political crisis where it's not capable of making decisions, perhaps even on its own austerity programs. I mean, the Kremlin is financing right-wing political parties within the European Union that then vote against sanctions against Russia. So Mr. Putin is playing different games here, but they all point in the same direction, to prove that Ukraine cannot survive without Russia, and to prove that the EU is not a credible actor in this game. Well, it could have been prevented a few months ago if Ukraine had made a serious effort to get its own house in order. The IMF has been very specific on what type of reforms need to be carried out, and there has not been a lot of things happening in Kiev. So the Ukrainian government, I mean, you can make all kinds of excuses why the Ukrainian government has had other things to think about, and there is a lot of sympathy for Kiev. But that doesn't remove the fact that the Ukrainian economy is not structurally sound enough to be able to make it on its own. And that is something that the EU and the IMF should have known months ago. And suddenly waking up sort of when it's 5 minutes to 12 is not to the credit of the analysts within the EU and the IMF. They should have seen this coming. And the fact that they didn't means that there is now panic, and panic is never very helpful when you have to deal with big crises.